And it's like looks like nothing good's going to happen for the community. And it's not going to go by very fast anyway. So it's like, what's the point of spending $3 billion and the train's going the same speed it always has?
Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. It's 11:02, and we want to get started and respect everyone's time. I am Crystal Mitchell. I'm the co-director of Recycle Black Dollars, and as well as a business coach and the co-host of the Business Zone with Crystal and Gilbert, and co-hosting and partnering with the BBA for the community business briefing. So we want to welcome everyone that's here. Thank you guys for tuning in again. We got another great informational session here going on. We have our guest, Mr. Michael Banner, who's going to wow us. And also my co-host today is Ms. Robin Thorne. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And so Robin, want to thank Stephen Turner. Stephen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Stephen Turner. I'm the managing principal of the Slayton Group. We are a risk management employee benefit company. Our sweet spot is that employer who has anywhere from 8 to 30 employees. Also, I'm proud to be a member of the Black Business Association as we celebrate our 50-year anniversary. It's my pleasure to have one of our esteemed Black business owners as one of the co-hosts, Robin Thorne. So, Robin, let me shift over to you, give a little introduction.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Steve, for the introduction, and Crystal for the platform. I'm Robin Thorne. I own CTI Environmental. We are an environmental and safety compliance company. We help organizations to minimize their risk and reduce their liabilities by providing safety and environmental solutions. We believe that your employees should go home in the same condition they were when they came to work. No injuries. And we also believe that our environment needs to be protected. So we offer environmental solutions to companies that aren't aware to make sure that you are complying with all the regulations, local, state, and federal. And we happen to be a general engineering contractor. And so you see behind me, Demo Girl. So I started a nonprofit after I did my first demolition project a couple years ago, knocked down a federal prison, and started this organization called Demo Chicks to let girls know that they too can become engineers and construction experts and demolition experts. So thank you for allowing me to co-host this segment.
Well, I am very happy that you're here. Just a disclaimer, the reason for this platform is to create a environment where we as Black people can come together and celebrate ourselves, and also to inform our community of what's going on, and to hear from some of our leaders that are in our community that are doing some awesome things, and they're here to share with you. This is my way of closing in the silos that operate in Los Angeles, and we as Black people working together, because we are unapologetically Black, and we are happy to be that. So that's my soapbox. So I believe, Robin, you're gonna give us a little bit about yourself and introduce is she introducing our guest, Stephen?
I think Stephen should introduce our wonderful guest.
Okay, so Stephen.
Well, if he hadn't muted himself.
You muted yourself, Stephen. Unmute. Oh, there you go.
It's my pleasure to introduce our special guest this morning, Michael Banner. Michael is the president and CEO of the Los Angeles Local Development Corporation. As we look at what's taking place today with the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the civil unrest of 2020, we look at how the Los Angeles Local Development Corporation was created after the LA riots. Michael has been around since the Tom Bradley, Dick Reardon, Kenneth Hahn, Zaragoza. Have I missed any mayors, Michael?
And the current one.
And so with that, it's my esteemed privilege to pass the podium over to Michael Banner.
Well, good morning, everyone, and it is an honor to be able to speak with you this morning and share what little knowledge that I have about how bad things are, and maybe some of my insights of what do we do next. And just by a little bit way more background, I mean, I've been in this particular finance space for my entire professional career. And as a native of LA, I don't know if I call it the distinct honor, but you know, this is my third civil disturbance
Wow.
to kind of go through. I mean, in 65, I was 11 years old and I lived like a block off 103rd Street. So I was at that time in the summer of elementary school, about to go to pass on the middle school to 7th grade. And so at 11 years old, you know, you don't have any sense of what's going on when you see brothers carrying an 8-foot couch, you know, all white, still wrapped in plastic, and a police car riding along next to them with 4 policemen in it, 4 deep, and nothing's happening. You go, wait a minute, even at 11, this is something wrong with this picture. You know, you kind of fast forward from there to the, you know, whole Rodney King induced civil disturbance. And that's after spending, you know, a decade of being a banker. And at the time I was a banker, I actually helped run parts of South LA. And to see that occur, actually the Reginald Denning beating was occurring while I was on the freeway, headed back from Irwindale. I had literally just accepted a job at Home Savings. I was going to stop consulting and go back into working for a financial institution. And on the way back on the freeway, I see the helicopters flying around over Florence and Normandy, which I didn't know at the time, but I tuned to talk radio and they started describing what was going on. And that's when Reginald Denny was getting beaten. So I stop in Compton, pick up my daughter and get back home in Westchester. And between the time of leaving Compton and getting to Westchester, I actually decided to turn down the job. And, you know, and my point of view at the time was, well, if somebody like me who's from LA, product of LA, and has some skills to try and do things to make a change, doesn't get involved, then I can't have any expectation that, you know, I'll be a part of the solution because I'm going to be part of the problem if I'm not trying to solve it. And that put me on this path when I left banking in the 80s, late 80s to today, and have, you know, worked in community development finance, which is kind of, it's known today, where in the 90s, it was a little bit of everything from revolving loan fund operators to CDCs. Over time, the vernacular has changed. But the mission and the goals have all still been the same. How do you get, simplistically, money in the hands of people who look like us that want to change our communities for the better? And as we can see today, that's still a complicated issue. And what I think that we might all agree is most troubling now is because we're in a kind of data-involved world, that you get so much information at your fingertip now that keeps telling you how bad things are. I actually find it a little depressing to know that I've spent, you know, 30 years kind of working on this stuff, and, you know, how much did the dial get moved? And how much is the dial going to move as we kind of go forward? And I know when Stephen put together that flyer, he had some information there talking about the financial wealth disparity, which I think was at Urban Institute or Brookings that the data came from, Steve? Brookings? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I actually happened to run across something. I had a chance to, I'm on the board of a national CDFI that's headquartered in Minneapolis. And last year, they started a training session that was really about for the board, so about bias. And we ended up having this session at the local YMCA there in Minneapolis, which had a center. And in this center, they had this exhibit, which actually had a representation of those statistics that Steve put in that flyer, of that's kind of 10-to-1 financial wealth gap that, African Americans and other ethnic groups other than Asian are likely to have 1/10 of the wealth of somebody who's white. In this exhibit, they had stacks of money, which represented the net worth of the different ethnic classes. So there was a stack of money that represented at that time, I think it was like $9,200 was the wealth of an African American in America. And they're in plexiglass. So you had a little small stack, and this big, huge stack of money of what represented white America. And when you looked at it that way, it was very different than looking at numbers on a piece of paper. And for me, it was very different because, having worked in a bank and been around cash, I knew what it's like when somebody would come in and sling $250,000 in a baggie on the counter that says, here's your cash for this week. So, you have some sense of that and, how much a stack of $100 bills is versus a stack of, dollar bills. So that has always kind of stayed with me. And it's still going to play itself out, I think, over time. I don't necessarily see how we change that dramatically. And what I'm most concerned about is how it might get worse. And when I say how it might get worse, if you think about the fact that we have this pandemic that's going on that is creating all kind of economic havoc. And we had just arguably gotten to the point where maybe we were recovering in some sense from 2008 and the great wealth transfer that happened then. And if you take Steve's number, which I think was $17,000 as the net worth of African Americans, if it was 17,000, and that's 2007 data, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 2007, what is it going to look like in 2021 with this meltdown that's occurring? The results are crazy. And if you're kind of in our space and the people who look at lending and numbers all the time, you'll notice now that what I think you're going to see is that credit is clearly going to tighten. So your ability to borrow for anything other than kind of a government facilitated activity might become increasingly harder. And that was our experience after 2008, 2009, when we as an organization had at that particular time, several $1 million worth of unsecured credit from banks, which is very difficult to get for organizations like ours. And at the time, when they started making the adjustment that started in 2009, having been a banker, I did something that I would never do again if the situation were the same. In 2009, I had a $1 million credit facility with Wells Fargo Bank. And we used to borrow from Wells Fargo to create a pool of assets, take those assets, and then kind of lay them off or securitize them, and then pay down the line of credit. And we had, been doing that for years and had handled what I thought to be the line in a very, effective manner. Wells Fargo had never had a late payment or any of those kind of things. But what happened was I said, okay, we got this thing that's happening, thinking like a banker as opposed to an entrepreneur. Let me pay off my line of credit, show them that I'm good, and we know how to handle it. And what happened at that time, that paid it off. I think I owed them maybe $300,000 at the time, paid it off. They just never sent me renewal documents to renew my line of credit. So it just disappeared. And the answer I got when I said, hey guys, what happens is, we're not in that business anymore. And that continued to happen as financial institutions pull back. So I would say, don't be surprised if you see that occur again this time around. Because right now, I think I saw something where banks this quarter have raised their loan loss reserves by something like the $32 billion. And if you understand the concept of loan loss reserves, that is money that they in theory, not in theory, in practice, think we might lose this kind of money on our portfolio of loans, so whatever you kind of have in that loan bucket. you think about it, they said we might lose $32 billion. That's a huge number. Now, I would also say in that $32 billion that they might lose, we are probably not a big part of that number. And the reason why, they don't loan us any money. So you can't lose with people you don't loan money to. So in one respect, I've always kind of said we ought to make the argument that, well, let us have the same ability to lose money the way everybody else does. Because if they allow you to lose money, that means you've gotten some money. And I think we almost deal from the perception that, lending into lower incomes and communities and people of color is quote unquote high risk, which there is really a wealth of evidence to show that it's no more riskier than lending than anybody else. It just becomes the barrier that gets created in access to capital that is tremendously difficult to overcome. And so as credit tightens, I think you're going to see the potential of wealth disparity get even larger. And then the question is, okay, is there anything we can do about that? And there's a lot of people on this call that have a wide wealth of experience in doing different things over time that could be a factor in how we choose to try to turn things around. As an example, Robert, weren't you guys I saw something, you guys agreed to collaborate with, is it Impact Capital?
Correct. We just announced an alliance with Capital Impact Partners out of the DC area, and we're going to focus on 3 cities, Los Angeles, Detroit, and what they call the DMV and back east.
Right. So that's I'm assuming a pretty big number for you guys to collaborate on. And your partners are big banks?
We actually are going to create our own community investment development bank to have the resources to then invest into other CDFIs, particularly CDFIs of color.
Yeah, okay. So this kind of leads me to which I'm sure you guys have heard ad nauseum about the pluses and minuses of the PPP program. And I'll just share our own story as a way to demonstrate how, sometimes big federal programs of some kind are good news, bad news. The good news, there's a ton of money that's became available. The bad news is it wasn't equitably distributed. And so when he announced that, my thought was, this is going to be difficult because, you know enough about, kind of SBA related activities. It can be very helpful, but there's, there are some challenges in making it work speedy. And I think what I was anticipating, that given the huge of folks that were going to show up, that the system itself wasn't really ever meant to handle that kind of volume. And I think we end up seeing that. And as a test, we submitted PP applications to about 5 different financial institutions, just so we'd be able to talk about what the process yielded. Ultimately got funded by one of the, I think, 6 banks we applied to. Which is the only bank that actually contacted us directly after submitting the application. All the other ones was kind of an online email response. Never really got the chance to interact with anybody and answer specific questions that they might have. And so when there's a lot of discussion about relationships and banks, and that's who they served first, the people they had relationships with, I think that that's probably reasonable that you do business with people you know and understand. So necessarily can't be faulted at that. But then when you peel back a little bit and look at the color of it, sometimes it's like, well, we had 40-year relationship with Bank of America. In fact, when we got started, when Tom Bradley was the mayor, Bank of America, an executive, helped launch the Los Angeles LDC. Didn't get a nickel from Bank of America. The one that I find was most interesting in the response is the one that we got from JP Morgan Chase. And we had been originally customers of WAMU when they came into the market. And that's got to be close to 20 years ago. And then JP Morgan took him over. And so we've been JP Morgan Chase customers for at least a decade. and JP Morgan has our payroll account. In fact, JP Morgan in our sense is our primary operating bank for almost anything. And I get an email from them saying that, sorry, we couldn't make you, we reviewed your application for the payment protection loan and your submission did not meet the requirements for the loan products for the following reasons. Unable to verify your average monthly payroll cost information from the information you provided. We provided ADP payroll records, the largest payroll company probably in America. 10-year relationship. So that just goes to show you how the system is not necessarily equal and is going to continue to be this way.
I'm good.
Michael,
Yes.
let me pivot and have Robin Thorne had a question she wanted to ask you. Robin,
you're muted.
I'm muting. Well, actually, I wanted to make a comment because you mentioned CDFI and you mentioned banks. So we're a small business. We've been in business for 11 years, and we had a relationship with a bank and was not able to secure funds from that bank. And they, rightfully so at the beginning, because our cash flow was a little tight back then, but they watched us grow. So they watched the progress we made. And when I would say in 2017, when we were consistently making sizable deposits on a monthly basis, we still were not able to secure funds from that bank. Talking about a 10-year relationship. And then a CDFI came through. So our business loan, our first business loan was from a CDFI. Our second business loan was from a CDFI. So that bank redeemed themselves through the PPP process because they did reach out to us and let us know we're working with our banking customers. You know, you get first dibs, but because of the system not being as efficient as they thought it would be, I mean, banks didn't know what they were doing, SBA. I mean, there was just a lot of confusion. So that fell through. Remember that first round of funding that went away in how many days? With the PPP, they put it out and
all of that stuff was so quickly oversubscribed. In like, in fact, the county had a program that was managed by the CDFI that I'm on the board of in Minneapolis. Okay. They opened it up and they crashed the website within 5 minutes with people trying to get in. It's almost like buying concert tickets, you know, it's that kind of thing where you have to sit there and make sure you can get in. But so to your point, and what Robert talked about earlier is that, you know, CDFIs have been identified as a part of the solution. And there's a lot of language that's in some of these new appropriations that are up now that I think I saw a number like $1 billion was supposed to be allocated to CDFIs. That's the goal. So clearly for those that are searching for capital, you know, you have to make sure you include CDFIs, I think, in your search. Because I think there's plenty of evidence that, you know, although CDFIs are not a huge part of the financial world, they are more effective in lending to people of color. I think there's general agreement on that. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with the fact that they are smaller. And so, you know, you talk to a bank, if the loan's not $1 million, then, you know, sometimes they have greater difficulty in spending time to work on that. So size actually does matter in that regards. So I would say that's one of the things to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's going to happen with CDFIs. If you believe that, as you said, Robin, they're helpful, making sure that you weigh in with the folks like Maxine Waters and Elizabeth Warren, I think, are now trying to promote this in this negotiation that's going on with the Republicans, and whether it's not a $1 trillion or $3 trillion that get put out there in this next round of effectively stimulus that's going. So, you know, if we don't ask, we won't get, has always been my philosophy. So you have to begin to continue to ask.
I'm glad you mentioned weighing in, because one of the things that we tend to do is we get people into office and then we don't hold them accountable. So other than weighing in on, I guess, support of CDFIs, are there any other points or subjects or letters that we can send, making requests? Any other recommendations you would have for us weighing in on?
Well, so you've got this kind of local, state, federal dynamic that's going on, and the federal government is so far downstreaming, you know, as much as possible. I think the comments that you make to the Federal Reserve, you know, our country's central bank, they've got literally trillions of dollars that they can make available. But one of the interesting things, if you read through the variety of programs that they offer, two things will come out very quickly. That one, you have to have collateral. And then two, you're supposed to have some credit rating. Those two things go together to make you eligible to deal with money that comes directly from the Federal Reserve through their different lending programs. And one that you may have heard about, Main Street Lending Program, the Main Street Lending Facility, which has not really done much of anything yet. And I think part of that is because you have to aggregate assets to a certain level and be able to draw down on that money. And it's probably similar to the concept that Robert kind of talked about, where they're going to create their own effectively pool of capital and create assets themselves, whether or not you lay those assets off to the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. But if we're not talking about those kinds of things, I think we're minimizing the fact that those things could be a solution. To the extent we can get them to come down market is really where I think the challenge is. And for us to say, here's the demand, we need this, because you have to match demand and supply. And I'd say that's one of the things that I would seriously tell you, that, you know, spend some time, and it could be, as far as I'm concerned, anything you can tweet to the Fed's Twitter feed, say, hey, we need the money. I mean, I do this stuff all the time. I do it to banks, because the more information that people are aware that there's a need, and you can articulate what that need is, I think the better off we're going to be. And, you know, clearly this pandemic is something that has got to get solved in order for us to get back to, I think, what you might call a normal economy. And I don't know if you know, you people say a new normal. What does a new normal mean for us? The last normal wasn't good, you know?
Right.
And so how do we define what the normal ought to be? And if that means more opportunities and access for people of color, we need to say that clearly and loudly. You know, I will say there's one thing that I focus on that might be slightly different than your kind of classical CDFI kind of activities, is that I tend to look for geography where things are going to be happening. And I'll share with you two examples. So one, for the last almost 2 years, I have been working in East Los Angeles in the corridor around the LA River. And for those of you who know LA, there's been this talk about the LA River is going to be, you know, kind of this big thing. And sometimes these things take 10 years. So we've been working up there because I saw investment activity start to move out of downtown, and it started to head north. Other thing I'm looking now more closely at Inglewood and the La Brea corridor. And these corridors to me are examples of what exists throughout LA. You know, you can pick several corridors in South LA, whether it's Crenshaw Boulevard, whether it's Vermont, Western, places where investment is needed, and places where we have some connection and understanding of. And to the extent that we think of strategies to make those communities more vibrant and attract capital, I think that can be a way to help fulfill our own entrepreneurial and wealth building needs. And in cities, there's a national sense that corridors are one of the things that will continue to make cities vibrant. And that's finding that balance between jobs and housing that I think we struggle with dramatically here.
Michael, there was a comment from Kane Nicholas. He indicated that the size and the history of CDFI matters as well. CDFIs with under $50 million loans are not included in the $1 billion appropriation. I have a question. So that was a statement from Kane. I have a question. So in your opinion, and I know you're saying you're heading to where things are happening, what are some of the strategic pathways that we can take to move ourselves? We understand that the funding and loans, that's always, capital for us has always been a misnomer and a challenge. So what are some of the things that we can do in moving forward to make some changes for ourselves, or I don't know if we close that wealth gap, or at least make some major headways in closing that health gap?
Well, a lot of the research shows that the wealth gap is related to how housing was financed by the federal government and how we were excluded from that vehicle. So intellectually, I'd say one of the things is to focus on how do we get housing as a foundation going forward to continue to improve on it. If you look at redlining, you look at the rules that were part of FHA, and my real estate, housing, economic guys talk about that a great deal of how that made a huge difference. So, if you bought a house in the 50s, guess what? That house is probably increased in value tenfold. And did that value transfer to your heirs? I mean, clearly that's one of the things. If you weren't allowed to buy the house, you ever had nothing to transfer. So the whole thing about generational wealth transfer becomes a problem. So I'd say that's one of the things. And in fact, that's probably one of the areas where if we go back to the CDFI models and the question about if you don't have size of $50 million, I would assume that if you look at the data, there's probably a lot of the CDFIs that are larger than $50 million have a housing component to it.
Yeah, I agree. Housing, because that creates an asset for you, and then you have collateral. So acquiring that collateral does seem to be a good move. There was a comment or a statement from Selma Taylor saying they just ended a webinar with Senator Cory Booker, and they are requesting support for the relief for the Main Street Act, which has a bipartisan support. The act is set aside of $50 billion to go to states and cities to fund groups, and that grants are a better way to go than loans for small businesses.
Well, if you think about, we're in an environment now where a lot of cases, everybody's top line revenues has disappeared. You go from having revenue to basically having no revenue because of the pandemic and the shutdown. And getting a loan, it kind of is like an oxymoron. However, that's the tool that they keep rolling out there. And how much debt can you take on if you don't have income to repay the debt? So to me, the question will be, how does that debt get forgiven, which they started out as a premise of the PPP. And I think is it tomorrow? Friday? Is it Friday, the 10th?
The 8th.
That's when the first applications for forgiveness can go in.
I believe
and so we're going to see how that plays itself out. And I know from talking to some of my friends in banks, they were all pushing for anything under $150,000 be automatically forgiven. Now, whether or not that sticks, I guess we'll have to see, because that effectively means everybody got a grant out of the PPP process. And if you end up with a loan for more than $150,000, then you, I guess, have to work out terms of repayment, which will probably end up being relaxed too. So, I mean, this in my opinion, this is like a it's not a sprint. This is, do you have the stamina to stay in the game for a much longer time period? And I do think that between the squeeze in capital and the pivot and opportunities, you know, how many people have to change their business model now and think about what do we do next? And who do we do it with? I think is the other thing to be thinking through.
And I think we should, with that, partnering up with other people so that we're not doing this alone. I think that makes more sense than trying to navigate this by yourself. I mean, this is really, really big. Robert asked the question, what are some of the recommendations for transforming the capital delivery system?
Give the money to people who look like us.
Okay. That is easier said than done.
Well, for sure. I mean, I know it works if you give us the money, but there's this, you know, and, you know, for me, it's interesting because I used to be a banker. So, you know, at one point in time in my life, when they say we're sending your loan downtown and all that kind of stuff, they were sending it to me.
Oh.
And so I know what it's like to be in those institutions and making those kinds of judgments. And if you have like no idea where Leimert Park is and you're sitting in Dallas in some loan approval process trying to understand, well, why should this business on Crenshaw that is next to Leimert Park be given a loan when you have no sense of what Leimert Park is and what it means? So partly the local decision making, I think, is something that we ought to be making noise about if we can, and try to get as much as that that happens locally. So the example I give you, it's if Robert and his new entity, it's easier to go to San Diego and talk to somebody if you feel you need to do a face-to-face than go to Mississippi or Dallas or Chicago to try to get your loan approved, you know, that kind of thing. So the money that's on the ground and in the control of people that look like us are how I think we're going to get the best outcomes for us. And that is something that public persuasion and policy has to be influenced to say, it's okay, you know. You will not have a $50 million minority-led CDFI if nobody is saying we need to have one, you know, because everybody's gonna say, well, we didn't know. Nobody said you wanted one.
Michael, I have a question for you. So when I hear getting money into hands of people who look like us, and I hear about grants and not loans, you think there's a education component? Because if we get the money in our hands, so especially during the season where we're pivoting, right? So you have people who are in business, they're not operating as they've always operated. So should there be some type of training or support for these businesses because they're in pivot mode, they're being provided these funds? Do they really know what to do with the funds?
That's an interesting, that's very interesting, because I struggle with this sometime. And for some of the folks who know me, we've had these discussions and initiatives all around technical assistance. And it's funny, a week or so ago, I was sitting there thinking to myself, and, you know, having been a banker in the 70s, and I used to talk to white guys all the time. I'm chasing them, trying to get their business. They were talking about technical assistance. You know what they used to tell me the story, normal story was? Man, I went into the bank, I sat at the bank manager's desk, I explained to him what I wanted to do, and the guy took a chance on me and loaned me $25,000. So I think that in some cases, the default for us has been training as opposed to capital, money in hand. And that's not to say that people need to be knowledgeable and understand how to maximize and run their business properly. But whether or not the folks who get most of the money are any smarter than us, no, I don't think so. I mean, I've lent to all kinds of people, and, you know, I don't see any difference in terms of people who no matter what color they are, you know, smart people are smart people. And clearly there's enough smart people of color around that are not getting the capital behind them. And so you can't take it. You can't take the shot that you want. And I think part of that is by design, you know, and I've raised money from banks, and I can tell you it's not easy to do because they knew I was going to go and I was going to loan it to people of color. And sometimes the expectation was, oh, you know, those loans not going to pay. You know, you're not going to get your money back. And that's not true. I mean, the last time I raised a fund, I raised $10 million, put up $1 million of our own money, raised $9 million from a bunch of banks. Everybody got back 100% of their investment, and they made nearly 5.5% return, cash on cash. And I lent the money to folks just like us. I think 80% of the loans that I made were to people of color, 80%. Usually it's the inverse. Maybe we get up to 20, but it was 80%.
So what type?
So I know what happened.
So what type of deals are you currently looking to fund? I know you guys, LDC has been responsible for arranging and deploying over $400 million of capital into our low income and communities of color. So what do you guys fund?
So the strategy that we've been on for the last, call it almost 2 years, because I kind of saw this coming, and as much as, you know, the economy had been on, you know, a fairly decent ride, and usually the only way to go from there is down. Mm-hmm. And so what I started thinking about, what happens when we start to have the downturn? And looking at the experiences that I had in 2008 to like 2011, turned out that what was most valuable to our clients was helping them figure out how to stay alive, how to restructure, how to work with their bank. It wasn't necessarily lending a bunch of more money, because when you have a situation where revenues are gone, you really have to think about how to restructure, how to deal with the issues and, you know, forbearance and all those things that were prevalent in 2008, 2000, they're all coming back. And so being able to figure out how to work with somebody and call it a lender or financial institution to either restructure or find the requisite amount of capital that allows you to kind of get to the other side is where I see we have a value add now. There's effectively plenty of money around for people who want to loan it. But I don't think that there's enough what I characterize as kind of workout strategists, which I think is going to be a big need for. And so, you know, we funded, so give an example, we funded effectively a $75,000 equity investment for a small company that had won a contract with Metro to put up graffiti abatement, which was this kind of product that they put on train stations, whatever, so it keeps graffiti down, which, you know, helped them get launched. Then we hit a pandemic. Metro stops all these additional things they were going to do. So now what does the client do? You know, he effectively owes us $75,000. So now we have to spend our time figuring out, okay, so how do we help you either pivot, find new customers to keep a revenue line going on, stand back on whatever we thought we were going to get the $75,000 back, how fast, and all those kind of things. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at right now. And to the extent somebody has a bank that they're working with, and one of the things that we've been good at is we can typically get banks to do things that their customers can't get them to do, you know, because we have relationships with bank. And, you know, I know enough people that I say, look, this deal will work, even though it might look a little crazy to you. Do I have to put some money in to make it work? Yeah, sometimes we do that. Sometimes I just need to be able to work with the bankers to say, look, we're the coach for this client to help them get through. And that's worked in a great degree in a large scale. And I've been doing restructurings for the last year and a half, folks who we put into deals for millions of dollars, and then the bank saying, you know what, we think we've done 10 years, we had enough, having to figure out how to move them to someplace else. So that's really what we're doing today. More advising than actually lending, because we think the advising side of what we do is what's going to set up another round of lending for us once things starts to stabilize.
But if someone was interested in obtaining a loan, how would they apply with your corporation?
Oh, you can go to our website, losangelesldc.com. There's a whole section on there for what's called a pre-application. You get a little bit of data to kind of figure out what the deal is. And then, or, just call me. I'm accessible. And in fact, most of the time I can end up talking to somebody, within a half an hour or so, find out what they want to do and how they want to do it, and make a pretty good guess about if it can be done pretty quickly, if there are challenges, what has to be mitigated. So we're always available to chat. And in fact, we do a lot of that and directing, because, some people are good at small loans, like the PCRs and some of those kind of folks. If we think it works for them, we give them the PCR, because they're going to pay much more attention to it than I would. We tend to be more real estate related and, 7-figure deals, that kind of thing. That's where we have an advantage and a competency in the marketplace. For the last 3 or 4 years, I ran a kind of a networking thing to try to make people understand that we're still around to help you with real estate. Because if we go back to that discussion about wealth, I was on the phone talking to a guy from Chase, who now is in charge of nonprofit and small businesses of color kind of thing in the Chase platform now, locally. And we were talking about how if you work with entrepreneurs, and oftentimes you'll find entrepreneurs who buy their own facilities or own their own facilities, 80% of the time, I would guess, they will give you the company if you keep paying the rent on the building. Because the ability to create wealth on the real estate side sometimes is more, it's better than kind of the ups and downs of having an operating company. But you need the operating company revenue to support the real estate and its growth. And that's kind of true even if you roll it over into the single family model, where to the extent that you got an income and you can make sure, rather than paying rent, the same number pays the mortgage. Yeah, you'll be a lot more aggressive in trying to get in there, because you might have an increase in the property value and you get the extra benefit out of it. And so you're maximizing the return on the cash flows that you're dealing with.
So with that, I'm going to ask this question. So with this pandemic and all that's going on, do you believe, since this is your space, that there could be the cost of housing or a property in Los Angeles will come down, or in the country, but we're talking Los Angeles? Is the pricing going to come down, or?
I think that depending on where if you had a balance in demand and supply, then you probably won't see much change. Prices might stay flat. I think to the extent that you see markets where I think the history has been, kind of in lower income communities of color, property values have gone down when there's been a deluge of property being given back. That kind of thing has happened. To the extent we see that again, yeah, there's some possibility we could see that again. But LA seems to have a big problem with housing. We got more people here than we have adequate housing for. So that may mean that the bets that were made on the rental market, and after 2008, where kind of all the corporate landlords came in and bought all these single family residences, you might see some of that happen again. I don't know that of anybody that I've talked to, and most of my work is on the commercial side, that they think that prices are going to precipitously blip. They really kind of feel that if they stay stable, they're happy, and that there'll be certain product classes where you're going to see values go down. So retail would be an example, or a retail asset now people don't know necessarily what to do with that because you have to think about converting it to some other use. Hotel would be another example. Like, what's a hotel now? Who knows what that value is? And so the most stable things on the commercial side are industrial, especially warehouses for, you know, all this logistics stuff that's going on, and multifamily, larger apartment buildings are another part of stability. So to the extent that you see the single family market, where all this discussion about of ADUs and multiple houses being built on a single family lot, to the extent that that stuff catches hold, that could stimulate more activity in a market. But you know, my gut tells me that prices, depending on where you look at, are gonna stay flat.
Okay. We're kind of rounding around to a close, everyone. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask Mr. Banner, also Mr. Banner, what is the phone contact information, your email?
mbanner@losangelesldc.com.
At Los Angeles, spelled out?
Spell Los Angeles all the way out.
DC.com. Okay.
.com. 800-366-1178 is a
Okay.
number you can get to my office. 800-366-1178.
Okay.
And you can reach me by mobile at 213-448-8043.
448-8043.
Correct.
Okay. All righty. Anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? Selma indicated that she felt that with the fact that capital is one of our biggest issues, seeking because when we do get money, that maybe seeking appropriate professional support to maximize those funds will make sure that we're making better decisions and critical decisions that we can help use that money to leverage ourselves up. I think that's basically what you're saying, Selma. To summarize that, anyone else having to go? This has been awesome because sometimes we just need to hear what we need to do. So
I have a question, a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
I mean, again, Michael, you mentioned something about Wells Fargo at the beginning. Next week on the 13th of August, just to give people a heads up, we'll have Wells Fargo on the line, and they're going to come out and talk about their $500 million funding opportunity for communities of color. So just want to, y'all got that on your calendar. And also, I'd like to switch it over to Robin. Robin had a closing comment too. Robin, you there?
I am. I was typing in the chat.
Okay.
Well, this has been very informative for me. You know, as an engineer, I'm a numbers person, but never econ. Econ has not been my thing. And but I like those numbers. I like when I hear billions of dollars and access to capital and getting money in the hands of people that look like us. And I'm thinking that there needs to be like a movement, even if it's an underground railroad movement, where everything's not, because you have small business development centers, you have all these organizations, and I've participated in many, but I think as a community, we need to be mindful of who we can mentor, who we can reach out to. Like Mr. Banner, I mean, you are tremendous. And how many young people are you mentoring or are learning from you, you know, and informally, right? Because I think that's what we really need to do in our community. And that's one of the reasons why I launched Demo Chicks, you know, and everything doesn't have to be formalized, but we need to get to our people, right? And we need to make an impact on our communities. And organizations such as yours, Crystal, we need those, right? But then we have to do additional work on our own. So those are my final.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think I've always said a think tank, and this is the reason for this platform, so we can have these conversations. But these discussions is something that we're going to have to continue having in bigger spaces. And maybe we need to have a town hall, or maybe we need to have a seminar where we're bringing all of these powerful people that can have this conversation with each other. You're on mute if you're talking to us. Robin. But I also believe that we need to make our officials accountable. And I think Robin mentioned that earlier. And we need to make sure that we're voting in November, not just for the president and that, but there are some propositions that are on the ballot that are really, really important for us as Black people. In fact, pivotal, not just important, pivotal for us to vote for. So one of them is to reverse the affirmative action ban. I think that's important. I think we need to have much more say so in the Proposition AB 5, where it's really destroying the independent contractor that have a place for in the workplace. If we're independent contractors, that means we don't want to be employees, and we have value that we can bring to the table in a different capacity. So those are the things that we have to do. So we are always asking what everyone else has to do. We have to put forth the effort to make a change as well. So what Robin said is us coming together to make that happen is just pivotal for us. And Mr. Banner, we want to thank you so much for sharing with us all of your wise wisdom, especially a man that has come through already 3 civil unrest. Wow. and this one I think is really critical, but there's, as we were, Robin and Stephen and Michael were speaking earlier, this is an opportune time. There are so many opportunities out there that we can take advantage of, but I think we need not to continue to work in this silo. We need to work together. If you have some ideas and some other people have the skills and the knowledge and the support, then why don't we come together to utilize that to make a bigger impact? Mr. Stephen, you have anything else to say?
No, I thank everyone. Again, log in for next week. We have Wells Fargo. Also like to thank Bill Allen from the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation for joining me in, although late. And Michael Banner, thank you for your insight. And let's talk about doing some deals. What's it? Do a deal, make a difference.
Let me close with one thing. I would say, if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. So think about what you need to be asking for, and don't be bashful about it. You know, all I can say is no, and you were going to get that maybe anyways. But we got to put the ask out there. If we need $1 billion in our community, we ought to be saying it's $1 billion, and you know, and don't be afraid to say it's that, because we won't ever get to $1 billion if we're not asking for it.
My grandmama used to say, "A closed mouth don't get fed."
Yeah, right about that. Thank you all.
So thank you guys. Also,
everyone.
this is a video that is on Facebook. It's Zooming live. It's also a watch party, and there is a recording of it, and I'll be sending this out. So please share it and invite more people in next week. We have, as Stephen said, Wells Fargo reps coming in to talk about their opportunity for their investment into our community. And know that the PPP deadline is August 8th. So if you're still applying, make sure you do that. But you do have to have your taxes, and you have to have your Schedule C, and I believe your personal. So you want to get that done. And the reporting is going to start happening. So make sure everything is in place. All your paperwork is in place. And we want to thank you guys. So we will see you next week. We thank you, Robin. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Banner.
Thank you, Robin.
And it's been a pleasure. And Stephen, man, thank you.
Okay.
So we'll see you guys next week. Have a great weekend. Be safe.
All righty.
Mask up.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Banner and Crystal.
Thank you. Stop the